Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of as heat waves roll across California and specifically here in Silicon Valley. The Bay Area's elite drip with riches as the Bay Area's essential workers sweat. Inequality swells in the face of COVID-19. PAC, we stand for workers' rights and a living wage. We stand for equal pay for women. We stand for access to the C-class. That's your CEOs and your CFOs for people of color. We stand for economic safeguards for our frontline workers. In Santa Clara County, the majority of the essential workers are Latinx, African American, and Asian. And we are also we are also those facing the higher death rates related to COVID-19. Now, PAC and 100 local faith leaders look to protect our communities and secure an inclusive, sustainable, vibrant economy for all. Listen to local voices as they share how moral courage can transform workers' rights, build wealth, and create financial security for all in Santa Clara County. Interact with change makers who stand up for policies that impact our most vulnerable population. Refocus as we move forward. I'm Reverend Ray. I am the Executive Director for PAC, which is People Acting in Community Together, and we represent Santa Clara County. We are a multi-faith, multicultural organization who develop leaders to speak power to truth and truth to power. We push for policies that drive economic, racial, and criminal justice for all. We push elected officials to transform unjust systems so everyone receives the same quality of life. Today, before I take a moment of prayer, I want to recognize the over 100,000 Americans who've lost their life to COVID-19. In Santa Clara County, I want to acknowledge the over 140 of our brothers and sisters who have lost their life. We want to continue to lift up, encourage, and support those who have tested positive, those who are hospitalized, and those who are impacted by the shelter-in-place order. And in this moment, I lift up, again, Ahmaud Arbery. I lift up George Floyd. In the senseless hands of violence and the unnecessary taking of innocent lives. I pray for solidarity where before my God, all stand equal. So in the name of faith and in the name of many names that we call faith, I create this sacred space, this place to mourn and this place to convene and this place to conspire, what it means to be a better nation, a better people, what it means to live out the creed of love where you are my neighbor and I see myself in you and you see me in you. So let us be of like mind, where peace, equity, and justice is what's most important in this moment, in faith, which we come and call by many names. Ashe, Amen, and
Ashe.
Blessings. All right. Well, I'm excited today. This is our third episode of the Justice Project. And in the tradition of what we're building, we have some amazing guests joining us today. So right now, I'd like to first introduce our first guest, Maria No Fernandez. Maria, introduce yourself to our Facebook Live guest and YouTube guest, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and what is giving you fire during this COVID pandemic period.
Hi, everyone. It is so nice to be with you all today. I'm the Deputy Executive Director with Working Partnerships and the Campaign Director with Silicon Valley Rising. And Working Partnerships has been in the community for almost 25 years now. And the work that we do is about building power with and for working people in Santa Clara County. And what that means is that we work on a host of different issues, from affordable housing to workers' rights, to healthcare. But really at the core of all that is, how do we build power and how do we really shift power in Santa Clara County with and for working families. And through Silicon Valley Rising, one of our core campaigns and coalitions that we came together around on about almost 4 years ago, it's really about, we are the center of tech and innovation, and yet we're also the center of inequality. And there was this desire to say, we, communities of color, working families, need to be the center of driving what it is that we need to have happen in Santa Clara County, so our families are actually thriving and not just barely getting by, and really tackling the role of the tech industry, both on the streets, but also in boardrooms, and building relationships with the industry to really restructure how we're in relationship with each other as workers and as industry leaders. So I am very happy to be with you all today. I think what's giving me life and energy in this moment, I actually just got back home because hundreds of us were in the streets in downtown San Jose in our cars safely with our masks, because we really want to take back this idea around the recovery, that the recovery is not going to be led by others, but that the recovery is going to be led by us, by workers and communities of color, really driving the process around what it is that we need. That when we're told to come back to work, to make sure that we've got masks. When we're told to go back to work, to make sure that we've healthcare. And so I'm just continuously impressed by people's resiliency, impressed by people's strength, and impressed by people's willingness to take to the streets and demand what is right.
Amen to that. It sounds like a lot of fire fueling you. So thank you, Maria, and welcome to the table. Ryan, let our listeners on Facebook Live and those who will see you on YouTube and our PAC family and our allies know who you are. Tell us about yourself, your organization, and what is fueling you, what's giving you fire during this pandemic period.
Yeah, my name is Ryan McGilly. I'm an organizer with UFCW Local 5. We represent close to 40,000 workers stretching from Salinas all the way to Eureka. Our workers are mainly in grocery, retail, and in cannabis. And so right now, because about 90% of our membership have been deemed essential workers during the crisis, I've been, what's really been fueling me and my organization is making sure that not only our members are taken care of and appropriately compensated for the work they're doing, but also all essential workers and everyone who is being put out on the front line, and it's really putting themselves at risk to keep our society running, are taken care of by their powers that be and the ownership of these companies. And so that's really what's been fueling us, and that's really where a lot of our efforts have been over the past few months.
Amen. Thank you, Ryan. The weight of a lot of essential frontline workers on your shoulders, and I know they appreciate your work, so thank you. And last but not least, I am so happy to have, as I call it, our residential theologian today, the Reverend Deborah Murray, Reverend Dr. Deborah Murray. We invite you to this place, and Reverend Doctor, tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and what is giving you fire during this pandemic.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Ray, and the rest of you. Indeed, it is an honor to be here with you. I am the senior pastor at First United Methodist Church, Palo Alto. I am a transplant here from Oahu. There, I also was a senior pastor and involved in a congregation where it was multicultural, where everyone had an identity of 2 or 3 ethnicities and spoke at least 2 or 3 different languages. Yeah. And so I come with that experience into this place and looking for people who are marginalized. At my church, I'm looking for ways to open up new possibilities for people who have not been seen or who have not been invited to the table. And so if you have been marginalized and feel as though you have not been seen before, come and visit me. There is a room for you at the table, and not just to sit there, but to actively engage in power and transformation of the world and this community around us. And so the things that give me fuel, I am fueled by a prophetic word that even though things may seem bad, that is when the Spirit ignites and excites us most, and that there is an opportunity for transformation. As equally bad as things can be, they can be even greater. And so that's what excites me, is that I see the Spirit moving and compelling us into spaces where we were not before, and that we get this opportunity to elucidate and illuminate the gaps that are there, and then also to call upon the creativity inside each one of us to fill them.
Excellent, thank you. Nothing like having a leader who looks to make those who may think they're invisible, to encourage them, to let them know that you're seen. You are not invisible and you matter. So again, thank you all three of you for joining us. And let's get right into it. Local gig drivers, those are your Uber, Lyft, and decentralized drivers, luxury auto factory workers, and fulfillment centers are calling for new safety standards, and they're also calling for pay raises based on the new risk that they are taking. They are working in close quarters, as others have the privilege of working from home. What a benefit it is to work for Google, and they have the luxury of working from home until the end of the year. So the question that I ask, based on these frontline essential workers who are in close quarters and experiencing and taking on the brunt of the risk, how do we push for policies to secure their safety? Let's start with Ryan.
You know, in the immediate after this pandemic and is settled and stay in place is removed, I think we need to ensure right to return policies are in place in a lot of communities and a lot of cities. It's something that our membership has thankfully negotiated for in many contracts, but I know that a lot of unorganized workers who are essential right now in hotels and restaurants being laid off or furloughed with no guarantees of return. So that needs to immediately be addressed once they do start coming back. I think in the long term, especially for gig workers, ensuring that AB 5, which is a state law that was put into play, that we voted on and was put into place early this year, stays in place and is actually enforced by the state. And so AB 5 would ensure that workers who do the essential work of a business cannot be classified as independent contractors and are employees of that company and are ensured all the rights that employees receive. Right now, it is being challenged. There's already $5 million war chest being collected by Uber and Lyft to fight this bill and to put it on a referendum on the ballot in November. So that's something that here at UFCW, we are actively working against, along with our partners in at the South Bay Labor Council, as well as other labor councils throughout the Bay Area.
Great. So you would think that after the crisis is over, that every worker would have a right to return. So you're saying that that's not an automatic?
That is not, unless you had it in a contract or you had a guarantee prior to the crisis, that is not an automatic. In fact, we've been told, or we've heard war stories, especially in hotels, that a lot of people who had seniority have been told that they were not that they were terminated and not laid off, and that they are more than willing to accept people to come back, but they would come back as new hires and not at the level that they were fired
So
at.
you would say that
So
we could say that that's an immoral way to improve one's balance sheet, because now you lose seniority, therefore you lose the pay rate, right?
Exactly.
Which was already an unlivable wage.
Mhm.
And now that you return, they are able to reset your pay, lower your pay, and improve their bottom line.
Exactly.
I mean,
That's definitely something that is definitely in the mindset of the ownership of these companies.
absolutely. And Dr. Murray, as you already know, many of these workers of which Ryan speak of are in our congregations. And speak to the moral response of some of the things that Ryan shared, and give us your perspective. What and how do we drive policies to secure their safe return?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can drive policies until we do something about the heart.
No.
Until we can see one another as human beings, then we can respect one another as human beings. But as long as we look at one another as chattel and expendable and something that we can use to manipulate our bottom line, then we won't have economic justice, because we will look at that force being expendable until that particular group of people decide that they're not going to allow themselves to be manipulated in that way. And so where the gospel for me comes in is that everybody understands who they are. Everybody understands the power that you have, the creative power that you have, that you've been called divine by God, that to expect more, to demand more, and to know your worth. And so when you come to the table with those kind of things, then you can expect that whenever you're being mistreated, that you do have a right to go see Ryan and do something about it versus to take on offenses. But there must be a moral majority that says that we will hold corporations their feet to the fire about these things. And we're going to do it with our economics. We're going to make sure that we don't participate in increasing your bottom line if you are not acting in accordance with a moral majority. If you continue to make money by laying off people and making them be required to rehire as first hires instead of looking at the 15 years or 20 years I've accumulated, we're going to say no, we're not going to buy your goods. We're not going to buy your products. We're going to hold out against that.
So Reverend Murray, you sound like not only do you want people to know that they're not invisible, but you want them to know that they need to know their rights, the ability to fight, and they need to know what power they have working together.
Absolutely, absolutely. Coalescing together, our voices become stronger together. You know, there's a scripture and it's Matthew. And for those of you who don't believe in God, I just want to tell you the little parable. The parable was one man came out early in the morning to go work for a laborer, a land owner. And one man went out midday and then another man went out a couple hours before it was closing time. And they all got the same pay. And so when you read this, you say, wait a minute, what? One man worked 8 hours and another man worked 5 and then one worked 2 and they all got the same pay. And so one interpretation of that is that everybody, regardless of when you come to know God, you will go to heaven. Another interpretation of that is that there are fair wage standards and that everybody, regardless of where you start, you will get a fair wage. And so we need to make sure that we understand the moral interpretation of having people get a fair wage, and that's a Christian thing.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Murray, for sharing. Maria, give us your thoughts.
Well, you never want to follow a reverend. So I kind of just want to like what the reverend said. And I really do mean that. It's very hard to follow the reverend because like saying yes, yes, yes over here. But I think the only thing I could add to that is I think we should also be really thinking about the role of our elected leaders in this and just the tremendous opportunity. Like, yes, we have to make sure that we're engaging our workers, we're engaging corporations, and elected leaders have a tremendous amount of power in this through how they structure their budgets, through how they structure policies, through influence, through their role as conveners. And so I think as we think about how do we take this moment of pain and crisis and make sure that we're using it as an opportunity to make transformational change, we have to also be centering the role of our elected leaders and really pushing them, calling them in to actually be having that same mindset of transformational change versus just seeing what's right in front of me. And so, you know, in San Jose, for example, we were able to pass the most aggressive paid sick days policy in the country. And it was because we had grassroots leadership pushing it. It's because we had elected leaders that had will. And it was kind of that perfect storm that has allowed to have such a strong policy in San Jose. But that's something that we've got to fight for and we need leadership on.
Excellent.
Can I say something with Maria with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Reverend. So Maria, thank you very much. When I talk about empowerment, I want to understand that you have the right, and with those rights is that you go to the ballot box. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for chiming in on that. And thank you for sharing, Maria. Very impactful when we have agency, government, and organizing working in unison. We see the benefit of grassroots. We see the benefit of pushing the moral agenda. Speaking of the moral agenda, right now, California, as Governor Newsom and state officials push for a new budget, what are our funding demands for those seeking relief from COVID-19 that are hit hard by COVID-19 economically? We have over 200,000 unemployed here in Santa Clara County. We have 9,000 homeless and unhoused students. We have 1,000 released inmates. That's a lot when we release them out into the community without resources. And the idea that they may just end back up in prison. Our Live Free team and beloved community are really working well and hard to address those issues. We have increased domestic violence as a result of this COVID crisis, and impact on small business is hard to capture, but the impact is indeed sequential. So what are our funding demands for those seeking relief? Ryan, let's start out with you and give us your idea what some of the demands for funding are.
I think to address a lot of the issues, especially with so many workers who've been out of work these past few months, I think rental relief or rental holidays should be something that needs to be considered at the statewide level at the governor and should be put on the governor's desk. I think on a more systemic level and broader reaching, need to put more funding into life development and skill development programs and educational programs, whether that be apprenticeship programs or programs. I think a lot more of that educational funding needs to be added to the budget as well, and I think that is definitely something that we've been pushing for.
Excellent, thank you. And for those who are listening and watching on Facebook Live, you can go to the PAC page, and there is a link relational to the new budget that the governor and state officials are looking. And you have the opportunity to call your local electives. I think we mentioned that earlier. All right, hey Maria, this time we're gonna make sure that you not follow the Reverend. So give us your ideas and thoughts.
Thank you for that. I wanna lift up two things in terms of the state. Actually, yeah, two. Let's go with two and then see if I get the third one. The first one is that I think it's very important that we are really intentional about urging the governor and the legislator to support those that can't access other types of resources. And I'm calling out our undocumented families, friends, and neighbors, and making sure that they're getting support in this moment as well. And so there's a campaign called Safety Net for All of Us. If you actually do hashtag Safety Net, the number 4 all of us, you can get more connected to that at home. But it's incredibly important that if we're talking about public health, we are including all of us. And if, I think all of us here and at home believe that our lives are linked. And so if, one group of us is not liberated, none of us are liberated. And so really making sure that our undocumented families are a part of the recovery plan and are taken care of. And the second one is around AB 3216. Assemblymember Ash Kalra is a champion, and he is championing once again a bill that includes expanding paid sick days. It includes paid family leave. It includes the right of recall that Ryan mentioned. And so it's important that as we think about our role in advocacy at the state level, that the state is prioritizing those two pieces. And that when we're talking about the budget, we're also looking at the impacts locally and making sure that we're not going down the route of just austerity, but that we're really looking at what do our communities need, and that we're using an equity lens to distribute those funds. And really making sure that leaders locally, statewide, nationally are really kind of seeing that their budgets as an expression of their values.
Thank you, Maria. So can be clearly said that this budget has the implications of really impacting the most vulnerable, if not handled properly in ethical ways and moral ways. Dr. Murray, go ahead and give us your ideas relational to this budget and things that you think need to be done.
Well, one of the things I want to comment about is the small businesses that have really been decimated and impacted during COVID. The SBA loans were supposed to be able to assist them, and they found themselves in a quandary of not really having a fiscal sponsor and having a good relationship sometimes with a lender that they could call and ask to help them fill out the forms or know exactly what to do. And so they were not able to get their loans placed in a timely manner, or either they found themselves register and they weren't able to get those funds. And many of them since then have had to go out of business because our Treasury didn't have the foresight, and I'm talking about on the federal level, didn't have the foresight of how to roll this out so that it could be equitable, so that those that really needed those loans would be able to get it. Now there's money that's been released on the second round. I think it's called CFI. It was released today. But now that's 1 or 2 weeks late. A lot of businesses have had to close up. And so when we look at doing future rounds, we need to understand that we need to include some operational money in there, not just for personnel, but there's still leases that have to be paid. There's still, insurance that has to be paid. And so really having some insight as to how small businesses operate, and putting forth some insight before things are actually activated in order for them to take advantage of some of the things that are there that's supposed to be for small businesses. So that's one thing about is our small businesses, the people that we're talking about.
Yes.
A lot of my hidden people, they
Yes.
work for small businesses, right?
Yes. Yes.
They're the ones that all of us who have the luxury of being sheltered in place and that can call Instacart and Grubhub and all these other things and have our groceries delivered, and they can come to our house. They're the ones that don't have that safety net. And
Yes.
so they're the ones that now I'm hoping that when your doorbell rings, or now I'm hoping that when you go to the doctor and you see those people who are there for you to assist you, that you understand their value. Now that when you're trying to educate your children over the table, that's that same little beautiful thing you've been sending to school every day, and now you're saying, now you know that our teachers have to get paid more to take care of your children. So
Yes.
I'm hoping that these COVID experiences that are excising the gaps and the inequities will motivate those who have privilege and that are just in a cocoon of privilege to move towards advocacy for small businesses and for the gigs people that are keeping our economy running.
Yes, excellent. Absolutely. COVID has definitely exposed what has already existed, and it has given us all the more responsibility to act accordingly.
Yeah.
So thank you for engaging that. So a good transition. Women in the workplace, especially women of color, are overwhelmingly on the front lines during this pandemic, yet they receive unequal pay and are often denied access to the C-suite that we call it. They're often denied to the CEOs and the CFOs of their industry. Dr. Murray, I'll start with you because you're for poor use of a word, you're a hybrid like me. You have a corporate experience, you have a theological training experience, and you have practical experience in the congregation. So how can we shift this phenomena relational to women in the workplace and women of color specifically being underpaid and no equal pay and denied access as others have access?
You know, one of the things that's really important, and oftentimes we want to put the onus upon the individual and not reach out any farther. But we also need to engage our brothers and all other sexes to understand when they don't see us at the table that they're not going to get a solution that's right. They're not going to come up with anything that's really innovative or creative or that's going to move the margin because we are the buyers in the United States. And so that they realize that there's some really important voices that are missing. Secondly, is that we also as women come together and share those knowledges. I have an experience of being an executive in a telecommunications company, and I was moved from Colorado to New Jersey. And I sat there under a African-American E-level vice president, and he looked at my salary and he said, "Oh my God, who did this to you?" And I said, "What?" Because I really thought I was making money. And I came across the country because I thought I was really making money. And he said, "You are not going to be able to live on that salary. Who was your boss?" And I was paid $20,000 less than everybody else that was working in that title, in that position. And they were supposed to purchase my home, and they didn't purchase my home. And so there were all these benefits that other people were receiving that I didn't receive. But it was because there was someone who knew exactly what it was that I should have been entitled to, that they stood up for me. And so we need to be able to stand up and cry out for injustices when we see it. And we do need to be able to have those discussions about pay and equity.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience. That's a testimony that we try to put before stakeholders so that they can do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Hey, Maria, let's go ahead and jump into my question for you is how can we protect women who lack financial stability and become stuck in domestic violence? Statistics say 60% of homeless women are those without economic stability and who live with a violent domestic partner.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we see this is that if you have a voice on the job and you have protections on the job, that is what's going to really provide financial stability for you and your family. And so the perspective that we have on this is that this is one of the core reasons why we are fighting so hard so that women security officers, those cafeteria workers, those shuttle bus drivers, all those folks that are making it possible for the tech industry to survive here, that those jobs aren't seen as just temporary jobs, or they're seen as jobs that just, well, they're low wage, what are we going to do? But that we're actually ensuring those are family supporting jobs, because Silicon Valley has poured billions of dollars into this diversity problem, billions of dollars into this problem. And it is critically important we figure out how we get more women of color in powerful positions within these companies. But what I want to add to that, and what I want to challenge on that, is that we also need to figure out how do we make those types of jobs that I just mentioned good jobs as well. So that we're not just saying how do we move people up, but how do we actually change that system entirely so that those jobs are good jobs that women can provide for their families, have financial stability, and when issues around domestic violence or any other issue happens, that they have that financial stability behind them because they have a voice on the job, because they have wages, because they have stability at the workplace, and therefore can provide stability in other parts of their lives as well.
Excellent. So a complete systematic overhaul and transformation, an infusion of ethical practices, an infusion of seeing women as myself, being equal. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, let's jump right down. I want to pull Ryan in. How do we fight for policy and systemic change that transform equity as we access new economies? A new economy that we have in California now is cannabis. And not that we're advocating cannabis and cannabis use, but it's a way of lifting up inequities. In the communities in San Jose where many individuals were incarcerated for low-level possession offenses, these communities are now hotbeds for cannabis shops. Yet at the same time, equity and opportunities for others who live in the community are non-existent. So cannabis, the equity application and the accessibility of that. Ryan, can you speak a little bit of that industry and what's happening in our communities and your experience?
Yeah, I want to agree with you. Like, just since we represent a lot of cannabis dispensaries and growers, you know, it's not an endorsement of the product, but we want to, since it is a legal industry now, we want it to be treated as any other industry in that sense. So just to get that out of the way. On the equity side, there are state and local level laws in place that do give priority to applicants who were affected by the war on drugs and were either incarcerated or family members were incarcerated because of their experience with law enforcement through old cannabis laws. Unfortunately, from what we've seen, what we've experienced is a lot of times that the equity applicants are just names on paper, and they don't actually have any, they become silent partners once the store is operational. So what we want to, you know, what we push for and what we really want to do is to really overhaul the systems in place for the equity applicants. One, so that enforcement of those equity applicants actually has legislative teeth and has funding to actively enforce these applications, but also to make sure that, you know, equity isn't just ownership, equity is also participation. So we want the equity owners to actually be the owners of the business themselves and not just owners of a piece of paper that has their license to allow them to sell. We want them to be able to run these businesses and to actually contribute to the community and to create, you know, something from the ground up that will, especially if they were locally affected by the war on drugs, you know, we feel like those people have the most information on how to positively affect how we move forward in this new economy and with the new laws in place.
Excellent. So the people that were incarcerated and condemned in the community are boxed out. The big boxes are coming in using the small guy just for namesake. And there's really not economic justice that's happening in those most impacted communities.
Exactly. They'll put them on paper. They'll be 50% owners of the license, but in reality, they own like 5% of the business or of the profits and have no actual stake in the business itself. So once the business becomes operational, they get completely pushed out of the way, or in many cases, they're being thrown under the bus once that license gets bought out by a larger entity or a multi-state entity. The equity owner usually has no say in whether or not their license gets sold in the first place.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan, for giving us that in-depth and insight of what's happening in our most vulnerable communities and how our most vulnerable being boxed out at the opportunity of equity. All right, let's keep it pushing and dive in. Now, listen, we are over our time, but I want to borrow at least 5 more minutes. So, Dr. Murray and Maria, I want you to dive in on the area of policy and systemic change around new economies in data analysis and telemedicine, or pick your choice of which you'd like to share. And we'll start with you, Maria. You go first.
Sure. I mean, I think what comes to mind for me around the telemedicine and what we've been hearing a lot from our base is that we have to, in this conversation, be lifting up the digital divide. We are moving to telemedicine. We're asking, our parents to homeschool their kids. We're asking our sometimes monolingual Spanish or Vietnamese parents to homeschool their kids through homework in English and on spotty internet solutions. And so what we've been really prioritizing is how do we develop short-term solutions like hotspots to meet the emergency need, but we need to be building the infrastructure for post-pandemic as well, because the digital divide didn't just come up 3 months ago. The digital divide has been there. And so when we think about policy and systemic change and equity, this piece around telemedicine and attend anything has to be lifting up the digital divide and making sure that we're prioritizing infrastructure as we also prioritize the immediate needs of our families. And the city of San Jose, not just the city of San Jose, but across our county, we've been organizing with school board leaders, community partners, advocates for the passage of Wi-Fi projects that don't, in communities that don't have strong access to broadband. And so I think that's an important priority for us as community members in this crisis and beyond.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Murray, I can
Yes.
ask you a question from our Facebook Live group, or you can answer from the
Facebook Live.
All right.
Them.
Excellent. So, and I thank you for your time. So just in respect and honor of your time, we have a question, Dr. Murray, from Matthew Mason. First, he thanks the union organizers and PAC of this topic. So his question is, I wanted to ask how our faith communities can organize together during and after the crisis to look at ways to raise revenue for needed public services and make sure those with the biggest ability to pay more to support our communities do so.
Yeah, that's a great question. As we've been talking about all of these, I've been thinking about the theology behind it, the theology that sometimes keeps women oppressed. And the patriarchal lens from which we look at the Bible, and we think women are supposed to be subjugated, and how that dovetails into domestic violence. And so we need a reinterpretation and a new interpretation of what our expectations are of the gospel and who we think the person of Jesus Christ is. And so in getting together from a faith community perspective, we have to ensure that those who are the least lost and left behind are behind. We have the moral imperative to speak up for them and advocate for those who are weak. And we need to get together so that we can compare our notes as to, okay, we saw these gaps happening in the system. We need to come together and identify them and then push toward having those gaps closed. We're now housing Hotel de Zinc. Well, it'll start June 1st. And so we'll be housing some of our unhoused guests for the month. And in that whole experience and trying to prepare to make sure that they're safe and that all communities that interact with them will be safe, there's some learnings that we need to be able to sit down at the table and share with one another, and then go to our officials and say, this shouldn't be. They should not be the ones that don't have PPE. They should not be the ones that are left out of the solution. We need to advocate for them. So I'm looking forward to this discussion during COVID to find partners who want to sit down and figure out how we can safeguard more of our unhoused guests.
And Reverend Ray, if I may, can I put in a plug here? Because I don't want to leave this conversation without saying, I think it's important in relationship to that question from the viewer, we need to prioritize schools and communities first.
Yes. Yeah.
We know that, in November, we have the opportunity to reclaim $12 billion per year for our schools, community colleges, and local communities. And what Schools and Communities First will do, for folks that may not know, is that it will close commercial property tax loopholes that corporations and wealthy investors have been using to avoid paying their fair share of property taxes. And so I want all of us to really become Schools and Communities First champions over the next few months, especially during this crisis where budgets are going to be decimated. We've got to make sure we're going to be funding our priorities.
Excellent. I'm glad you mentioned that, Maria. And where can they find those who are not familiar with Schools and Communities First? Where can they find additional information?
So there's a great website that's been put together, schoolsandcommunitiesfirst.org. And if you want to join there's a local coalition, including PACT and others, feel free to reach out to me at Working Partnerships USA, and we'll plug you into work because we really do need true champions for this to get across the finish line.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for joining us. Ryan, parting words, what would you like our listeners and individuals in Santa Clara County and Santa Clara to know?
I agree. The Schools and Community First and AB5 are going to be huge issues come this November. It's not just the national imperative to vote, but down ballot voting matters, and local elections impact your daily lives. And I think that's something that, really everyone should participate in this election. It's going to be a generation defining election one way or the other, but the more educated you are going into the ballot box, the better you can affect your community and improve the lives of those around you.
Excellent, Ryan. And last but not least, our resident theologian, Dr. Murray, what would you give our listeners and our organization and county and cities in parting words?
Well, in parting words, I would just want to say that we need to invest in healthcare. We need to invest in healthcare for everyone, and especially in mental health care. It's not just the gig workers that are going to be impacted or that are impacted now, but it is everyone's mental health is at stake. And so we need to ensure that we are taking care of one another, calling one another. If we see someone who's acting erratic, please reach out to them and try to ensure that they can get some mental health assistance, because the things that are happening today is enough to make you lose your mind. But I don't want you to lose your mind. I want you to reach out to one another and find security in community and your faith community and in God. Yeah.
Excellent. I'd like to thank Ryan, Dr. Murray, and Maria for joining us today. Before I close out, hot things that are happening right now. You heard us talking about the budget. So Santa Clara County just extended the eviction. If you want to go to Silicon Valley at home and get more information, they're going to be holding an information session, I believe, tomorrow. So go to Silicon Valley at home to get more information about the moratorium on eviction and mortgage foreclosure. That's great news for the county. And also, we want you to go to the PAC Facebook page to look at information around the budget. We demand an inclusive and moral budget for all Californians. So it's important because this budget will have a direct reflection on the most impacted. And last but not least, we want you to make sure that you have filled out your census, help those get to information about filling out the census, and then make sure that you are registered to vote. You are able to go to vote.org to see if you're properly registered or registered if you're not. So we want you to join us next week for our next topic of fear and mindfulness in the time of COVID. Thank you for joining us. Together we can create a different California and a more stronger, united, and new improved Silicon Valley. So next week, join us, and we appreciate your time. Dr. Murray, Ryan, and Maria, we thank you and we appreciate you. May you be blessed abundantly and stay safe during this time of shelter in place. Thanks, everyone.